Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Lewis, and I am a teaching fellow at Asala. I teach third year. I have taught third year for a number of years, and MArch, and this year I'm helping out on second year. And I'm going to be doing a series of filmic tutorials for you guys to introduce how we can utilize film within an architectural context and how we can use specific programs in order to not only tell the story that we want to tell, but also as tools for investigation in and of themselves. So specifically today, I'm going to be talking about After Effects. And After Effects is a great program for anyone who hasn't used it, and it's a part of the Adobe Creative Suite. And what that means is not only is the interface pretty similar to things like Photoshop and Illustrator, but it also works really well with those programs. So for example, we can come from Illustrator directly into After Effects and preserve our vector paths. And that becomes really useful once we start talking about using site plans with our drawings, or exporting a 3D model into Illustrator, then bringing that into After Effects and being able to manipulate our models. So there's a whole range of things that we can do with it. Today we're going to be introducing just the basics, just kind of beginning to open it up and look at it. For those of you who are hungry for more, you guys, I think, have access to the Lynda tutorials, which are excellent. They're really deep dives. I'm going to be going much more from a kind of a focused, specific kind of exercise here. But if you want to learn more, those are a great place. And obviously YouTube is also an awesome source for tutorials, for clarification on anything or elaboration on anything. Now, when we're talking about film, there's a couple things that are really important. Films inherently are narrative. And what that means is it's important that you understand what you're saying and that you have a narrative arc, right? We don't just, kind of go from nothing to nothing. A film has movement, and not just movement literally as a moving image, but also movement in terms of a story evolves over time. So there's a reference point that I'd like to point you guys towards it as a way of examining some of the powers and some of the tools of this, which is a series of filmic studies or filmic essays made by a critic named Tony Zhu, under the title Every Frame a Painting. And there's a couple specifically that I think would be valuable to you. One is this one here about composing movement. And another one is this analysis of the film Drive through the lens of the quadrant system. So what the quadrant system is a compositional tool which helps focus how one films. It's a way of composing a shot in order to tell a story. And that idea of composition is the second point that's really important before we set out any filmic piece, or indeed any drawing or a portfolio or anything, right? And these are simply the rules by which we're going to communicate our agenda, okay? So there's many different ways of doing this. You don't have to invent something, but by creating a structure and by adhering to a structure, what you allow yourself to do is you allow yourself to move through the iterative design process while maintaining a degree of order, and that allows you to tell a story more compellingly and with greater specificity. Now, obviously, you can play with this stuff, but it's important to have a kind of a command of it before you begin playing with it. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to talk through a simple juxtaposition of two images, a still and a moving image, through After Effects. So what you guys will be doing from your site recordings is you will be taking a still image and putting it into conversation with a moving image. Now again, how we sequence those still images tells a story, because the first picture sets up the second picture, sets up the third, etc., etc. And we have the relationship between the left visual field and the right visual field. And so how you compose those things becomes how you tell your story, all right? So that's important to start with from the beginning. Another thing that's important is how you share your files with one another. I believe Laura has set up a SharePoint within the team structure so you guys can have access to each other's files. And why that's important is because if you start to move around your files as you're working within a team, your After Effects links can break down. So you should host your After Effects file in a shared position with all your other content, which means you can all work on it together and those links aren't going to be broken. Okay. So now we open up After Effects for the first time and we're met with this dialog. We click on New Composition and we're brought up with this dialog box. Now, within this panel, we can set our aspect ratio, and our aspect ratio relates to this notion of the compositional grid. So, are we designing for Instagram? In which case, we're going to have a more or less portrait format with set pixels, right? If you're designing for that space specifically, then you should be working within those aspect ratios. If it's a 4:3, 35 millimeter aspect ratio, that again has a specific relationship. In this context, I'm designing for the computer screen. And so what that means is I should be working within the native aspect ratio of a computer. So I'm working right now at 1920 to 1080. We also have our duration, how long our film's going to be. You can change this later. It's not super important for right now. I just set mine to 1 minute and 30 seconds. If we need more time, we can add more or we can take more away. Okay, then I click OK. Now what that does is it sets up my working window here. On the left-hand side, I have where my assets are going to be. And on the bottom, I have my timeline. So I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to take a series of photographs that I have already, and I'm going to drag them over into this panel, and that's going to give me a bunch of assets that I can work with. Now, if I drag those directly into the timeline, it's going to layer them up, and now I've got a bunch of pictures which are all stacked on top of each other, which all run for the full duration of my composition. Okay? If I want to trim those, what I do is move the playhead to the beginning. I can type into the timeline here. Let's say we want them to last for 3 seconds. So 3, that jumps the playhead to 3 seconds. Move my cursor over here, holding Shift, and that will snap it to the playhead. So if I don't hold Shift, I can move them around. We won't snap to the playhead. I can move back around, blah, blah, blah. But because I know I want them to be exactly 3 seconds, if I hold Shift and move it across, it will snap to the playhead. Let go. And now we can see once I move beyond 3 seconds, it opens up. Okay, so we can press spacebar to play the playhead, spacebar to pause. And you can see this green line down here. What that is it's the program pre-rendering what the content is. So if I come back over and I take some video that I have, drag that back over into the panel. So now I have these video assets over here as well. Drag them on top. And we can see now that green line has disappeared. That's because I haven't yet pre-rendered these films. So now if I press spacebar again, we can see what's happening. What's going to happen is that line, oops, turn that sound off. You can turn the sound off on your clips should you not want it by this icon. Sound's not so important for us right now, for me right now. And so I'm going to turn it off. But we can see that green line going. So you can see the film's moving pretty choppy right now, and that's because the program's pre-rendering out. And if I press spacebar again, it's going to pause. If I bring my playhead back to the beginning and press spacebar again, it's going to move nice and smooth, okay? So that's just what's happening up there. Now, what I want is I want my left field to be static images, and I want my right field to be moving images, all right? So I'm just going to move these out of the way for now. I'm going to come over here. And you can see that what we have is all of the pictures on top of each other for the exact same amount of time. Now, if I want to create a ruler, or a guide rather, that's going to designate half of my screen, the way we can turn that on is click in the composition window, press Command R, and that'll bring up your rulers around. And now what I can do is click on the zoom window, say fit. I know my pixels are 920 wide, which means, or 1920 wide, excuse me. So if I drag from there over to 960, that will give me half of the screen, right? So now, if I click on this image, for example, and drag it over, let's just turn off these other layers for now. The eye icon on the left here is visibility, right? So that's just turning on or off content. So right now, the only thing I have visible is this picture of the grass, okay? So if I move that over and I hold Shift, I'm going to snap it to that guide, okay? Now, it doesn't take up the full thing, so I need to adjust it. Can you just scale it up? In order to scale it, just like in Photoshop, if I click on the corner and move it around, I can scale it. It's a free transform, so if I hold Shift, it will lock the aspect ratio, and now I can scale. So let's move it over so it snaps on the side. I can see it's a little bit too big, so let's bring it down a little bit and then bring it back in. Okay, so I have a static image here playing for 3 seconds in the position that I want it. Now, I want to have a film, which is occupying the other side, so let's bring that over. Turn the visibility back on and move it over to the side. Again, I'm going to scale it. Okay, so now when I press play, I have half of my screen with static image, half of my screen with moving image. Again, I need to trim the film because it's it's longer than 3 seconds. So again, let's move our playhead to 3 seconds and zoom all the way out so I can bring that film down. So you can see what's happened is basically we have the kind of, the lighter green and the darker green. That is the kind of active window of the film, right? So I can shift it beyond that. So it's non-destructive editing in that sense. I can always expand it beyond. Okay, so now when I jump, it's going to clear the screen for both, right? Now, I would say, in the context of this, and again, thinking about, kind of narrative and what gets said, everything that gets shown is important. So in this case, the color isn't actually really what's interesting to me, what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is about, the kind of relationships between these things, how we can study something as an isolated kind of fragment, or how we can see that thing in motion. And so if I come over here to effects and presets, excuse me, and go to hue saturation, and drag that on top, what I can do is I can drop that saturation down, and now I've got a black and white image, right? So now we're not talking about color, we're not paying attention to color, all we're paying attention to is movement versus static, okay? So now, move my playhead back to 3 seconds, so I can type it in there, or if I'm moving along, again, I can just hold Shift, and that's gonna snap it to the cuts that I've already made. So I'll take my second image and I will stack it off, move it again, holding Shift, and now you'll see when the static image disappears, oop, that one appears. But I haven't positioned it yet, so I'm going to snap that back, clicking and dragging, holding Shift to snap it, scale it a little bit to make it bigger, and move it over. Okay, so now one to the next, we have that movement. Okay, so we're just going to repeat this for each of our pieces. I'll drag this film over here. I'm going to work with my films on top, and I'm going to work with my static images below. See how we get on. Okay, so this, we can see that film clip goes well beyond our composition. So another kind of means of trimming that I can do is if I double click it, I'm pretty sure I can just trim it in here. Nope. So composition, where is trim at playhead? I just did a workaround, sorry. So if you Command-Shift-D, it just splits the layer. I can't remember where trim was, but commands are the way to go. So Command-Shift-D will split your layer at wherever the playhead is. So now we have our next video, which we need to turn back on. And if we move this over here and we scale it up again, bring the desaturation back on top, drop the saturation down. And so now we have that moving from one to the next, clip to clip, okay? And we can see how there's an evolving dialogue that begins to take shape. We're moving through space and we're understanding the kind of, visual textures, the kind of material textures of this place. So, I didn't shoot this stuff with a specific narrative in mind, but when I look at the photographs that I have, what I can begin to see is some kind of relationship of scale. So how we move into the kind of spaces of the grass. I might be able to tell a story about how space expands and how we get a richer sense of material texture as we zoom into something. And so what that might mean is I want to take my kind of more zoomed out photos, and I want to start with them, and I want to slowly move us into my more zoomed in. And what that will determine is what my sequence is, right? So again, it's just, you're going to have a huge amount of photographs, you're going to have a huge amount of video of the site. And rather than just dumping everything together and just saying, well, here it is, try to think through, okay, how can I structure or sequence these things in such a way that they begin to tell a story about how I understand that space? If you want to do the next level, you should be recording these things with that specific agenda in mind. And the best kind of way to do that is not to simply go to a site and take pictures of every single thing, but spend a little bit of time walking around it, look at it, think about it. What is the site trying to say to you? What is the site telling you? And once you listen to those kinds of things, then when you take the camera out, you're photographing with a degree of criticality that allows this filmmaking process or drawing process or architectural investigation to be much easier. Okay? So what we have here is we have the beginnings of how we can put two things in dialogue with one another, right? Okay, so the limitation of the way that I've done this is that it's difficult to give myself space anymore within this, okay? So what I mean is, if I want to start adding text or something to this, if I want to play with the composition, I have to rescale everything, okay? And that's not super useful. What I mean is, this as a kind of compositional window is dependent upon each individual clip. And so that works. You can do it. It's effective. However, it's limiting. So another way to go about it, which gives you a little bit more power, is I'm just going to delete all those films. I'm going to take all of my clips here, and I'm going to make a pre-composition, which is half of this window. So if my overall window is going to be 1920 by 1080, if I press Command K, it re-brings up my composition settings window. And I can make a composition which is half of that. So rather than creating a guide, which is at the halfway line and scaling everything to that, what I can do is I can make two compositions which are each half of the screen. And this is going to ultimately give me more flexibility. So I'll just walk you through that really quickly. So half of that would be 960. It wants to lock the aspect ratio, so I'm going to unclick that and say 1080 for my height. Say OK. So now what that does is we have half of our what is going to be our full window. Okay. So we'll bring these pictures back, scale them, bring this picture back on top. Turn these guys off. Turn all these other ones on and make sure they're all scaled to fill the window. That one's way too big, so I'll shrink it down. Next one's going to be too big as well. Let's just delete this one because we don't need so many. Because you get the point. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in a bit, fit to window. And I want to stagger these so they're going to each play for that 3 seconds. All right. So take my second clip, drag it along. Take my third clip, drag it along. Fourth clip, drag it along. I can zoom in and out of my timeline on that top bar to see more or less. Drag it along and drag it along. Now, if I zoom my playhead along to the last clip, and I click here, double click in this lower bar, and I can say, oops, pardon me. Double click is not working for me for some very strange reason. So what's going on here? That should be working. Apologies, everyone. There we go. I don't know why that was working. So it was just two finger clicking down there, but and then I can say trim comp to work area. So what I've done there is this, so we have this top bar, which scales our media in and out. And then we have this secondary bar, which is controlling the overall length of our composition. Now remember, we set it initially to 1 minute and 30 seconds, but this pre-composition that I'm working on here isn't 1 minute and 30 seconds, it's simply 6 clips for 3 seconds each. So if I drag it here, double click and say trim comp to work area, what that's going to do is it's going to make my overall composition, 18 seconds, the length of my 6 clips, okay? So now, what I have, if I double click here, oh, I'm just saving it, sorry. That's what my computer's being slow, I'm not gonna save it. Apologies for that, workspace, all panels. So if I double click on my composition here, why is that not working? Oh my goodness gracious, sorry everyone. Command K to bring it up instead. And I can change my composition name. So here I'm gonna say static images. Okay? Now, I want to make a new composition for my videos. So that means file, new, or no, excuse me, new composition, 2-click here. And this one's going to be video images. Now, we're going to take our video images, we're going to drag them into the bottom, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to drag it over to 3 seconds. We're going to reduce the time of all of these, turn off the sound. On these ones are going to go way beyond, so what I'm going to do is Apple Shift D. Apple Shift D, again, remember, splits them, then I can delete, so now they're all at 3 seconds. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I can make sure that all of my compositions are taking up the full screen. Turn that one on, scale that one up. Now you guys, I'm not paying a huge amount of attention, obviously, to like where I'm cropping this in the frame, and I'm not really paying attention to my sequence, but it's really important that you guys are thinking about that in terms of what comes after what. Okay, so now if we move again to my playhead to 3 seconds, and then move this video to the end of this, and move this video to the end of that, and this to the end of that, and then zoom my playhead over to the end, and again 2 fingers to say trim comp to work area, and now we have video images and static images. So in my asset panel now, I have, I have video images and I have static images. So I'm going to make one more composition, 2 fingers, 2-finger click, new composition, and we're going to say this is like main body. And this one I want to bring back to 1920 because that is my kind of full film. Say okay. So now what we have over in the left-hand body of our in the left-hand panel of our assets, we have our static images, which I can click and drag on, and our video images, which I can click and drag on. Now each of these things are set to the dimensions that we want for the half screen. So if I bring my guide across again, fit to window, put that to approximately 960. And now if I take my video images and I move that over to the right, I take my static images and I move this over to the left, and it will click on, and this one will click on. Now, the benefit of this is that each of these windows is, first of all, just a little bit tidier in my overall timeline, but also if I do something like, for example, add a desaturation to my video images, it does it for all of them. So because they're nested, I don't have to apply effects separately. I can apply effects all at once. And that's really useful. And the other thing is that I can say, actually, while I'm looking at this, I realize that too much of the screen is taken up with, what's going on with that flicker? Must just be a pre-rendering thing that's going on. That's a bit strange. Let's see if it's still doing it. No, it's just a flicker in the pre-render. Okay, but so we can see that my entire visual field is taken up with content right now, and maybe I want to draw your attention to something texturally. I want to be able to give you some of a GPS coordinate for where these things were taken, or I want to be able to give you a time of day, or I want to be able to give you some kind of textual clue, which is going to elucidate, kind of my decision-making process or something in terms of these photographs. And now what I can do is I can scale the pre-composition itself as I would any static image, but it means that, again, I don't have to do that for every single one, and it's preserving my clipping. So if I go back in now to, if I double click into this pre-composition and I want to move this around, I can reframe the content. And if I jump back to the main body composition, you can see how that's live updated. So again, this is there's a little bit more work involved in setting up this document, but it fundamentally gives me a lot more options when it comes to fine-tuning, to editing, etc. So it's simply kind of two ways in which we can work through a problem. I think it's, personally speaking, I think it's always worth, kind of having a robust file structure within anything. And so this just gives you, again, a little bit more flexibility. So now we could say, for example, as I was saying previously, we could bring text into that. So if we click here, we could say, like site recording 001. If I double click on that text, and over here, I can change my text color. I can change size. I can change everything that we would as per any of the Adobe products. Fit. So now we have a little bit more. So obviously I would have to change these as the kind of frames change. But you can see how this begins to open up a little bit more possibility. Okay, so I think that is enough for now, I hope, to get you guys going. The important thing to think about, again, is image selection and image sequence, and getting these things into a place where they begin to speak to each other in a way that you can talk about and that tells a story. And so that might be that there's a kind of a relationship between the left and right in terms of setting up a photograph and then filmically taking us to that photograph, or looking at a photograph and then panning up and down from that photograph, or looking at a photograph and filming from the reverse of that position, or et cetera, et cetera. So thinking through basically the relationship between what a static image does, what a moving image does, and how those two things talk together, and then putting them into conversation with one another, okay? So one final note before we kind of go on here, which is about, or two final notes. One, which is just kind of as you're working thing, something to be aware of, is that After Effects can be pretty hungry when it comes to kind of processing. And a way to clear out your cache to keep your computer running fast is important. So if you click on After Effects, you go into Preferences, and then you go to Media and Disk Cache, it will bring up this dialog. And if you click Empty Disk Cache, what that's going to do, it's going to empty all the pre-rendering that your computer's been doing. So you can see in the very short amount of time we've been doing this tutorial, that's eaten up 5 gigabytes on my hard disk of rendered space. So if I click OK, clears all that out, and now I'm going to lose all of that pre-rendering. It looks like it's still there. It's not. But it will help my computer run faster, okay? So periodically as you're working, especially if you feel like your computer's getting sluggish, it's a good idea to clear that out. Second thing is exporting. The best way to export this is to do it through Adobe Media Encoder, okay? So if you go up to File and say Export, Add to Adobe Media Encoder queue. I'm gonna do this. It's probably gonna take a minute for my computer to load it up because my computer is really slow. But you can see it's launching this program over here. And basically the reason why this is so much better is because you can export directly from After Effects. However, Media Encoder has tons of codecs embedded within it, which make rendering much more streamlined. So you can render it specifically for YouTube at 720 DPI, or you can render it for an HD TV, or you can render it for blah, blah, blah. There's all sorts of ways. And it's a much more effective compression tool to make sure that your files are a nice size, they don't get too bloated, but without losing resolution through compression and things like this. So advice is always render through Adobe Media Encoder, okay? Apologies, it's just kind of going right now. Now, over the coming weeks, I'm going to talk to you guys about a couple more ways that we can build upon these films. And that will be through things like adding in vectors. That will be through talking about, how we think about sound, how we work within Premiere Pro as well, etc. In the meantime, my best advice is simply to play around in the interfaces, right? As with any computer program, the more time you spend in the environment, the more comfortable you get with it. And when you're looking for tutorials, the trick, as with any other thing, is to be specific within your search terminology. So don't just Google basics of Illustrator, basics of After Effects, because you have no idea, what that person's agenda is going to be. It's much more useful to you if you say something like, all right, I want to make my clip black and white. So how to make a clip black and white in After Effects. That's going to turn up a result that's going to be immediately useful to you. And each individual time that you do that, it becomes, just like another tool or another trick that you learn, okay? But just playing, messing about, that's the way to kind of gain comfort and familiarity. Sorry guys, I'm just kind of like waffling on as this thing's trying to load, because I want to show you how to do it. Yeah, have fun. Have fun with it. And also talk to each other. Talk to each other as a team throughout the process so that you are kind of aware of the decisions that are being made, so that you guys kind of communicate clearly, what that agenda, what that narrative agenda is and things like that. Now, it's taking a minute to dynamically link it, but basically what's going to happen is my clip is going to turn up in this window pane. If we were to launch this program without having gone directly through After Effects, we could search for our clips in the left-hand window here. Same thing, that we looked at in terms of this is, basically what you can think of as like an asset panel. So this is just, searching through your hard drive. However, because of the dynamic link, it will pop up here eventually. And I can show you how we export. Okay. And thank you for your patience. I hope the pacing's been okay. It's always hard when you make tutorials because it's going to be too fast for some people and too slow for some people. Obviously, you can watch it again. You can pause it. But if you need additional help with any of this stuff, again, I think the Lynda resources are really good, or YouTube. If I'm going too slow for you guys, just scrub through it really quick, and then move on. Okay, so if we click here on presets, what this is going to do is going to open up a dialog box in which I can select from YouTube compressions or Vimeo or whatever kind of place I'm going to be playing it. I'm just going to cancel this because you can kind of mess around with that yourselves. But basically, you just press play, right? So it pops up here. This is your codec. H.264 is a kind of standard codec that's basically going to play on everything. If you click on here, it's going to optimize for whatever your specific engine is, or whatever your kind of specific upload position is. And then this is your target destination for where the file is going to save, which, just make sure you kind of know where that's going to be. So, probably your desktop or wherever you are hosting your files, and then just press play. So pretty simple. I hope that was useful for you guys, and I really look forward to seeing what the kind of Filmic results are. And again, we'll be building on this in the upcoming weeks. Thanks so much for sticking with me till the bitter end, and have fun.